lecture series. When I think about Kingsley, there is a quote from Dr. King that comes to mind, and it is this: life's most pressing and urgent question is, what are you doing for others? And throughout his life, Kingsley has used his voice, his pain, his triumphs, his trials, his victories to work for and serve those in greatest need. To give you a little background on Kingsley, he is one of our own, originally from the greater New York City area. He was born and raised in Queens, New York, and he has joined us here within the College of Medicine, where he is currently a PGY2 medical physics resident, specializing in therapy at the Dana Center in the Department of Radiation Oncology. Fortunately for me, in my role in diversity, I have asked him to speak and provide insight and perspective for our students and faculty on numerous occasions, and he has always said yes, thankfully. And his yes, even at the early stages of his academic and professional career, truly embodies his leadership and his commitment to use his power to empower others. So please join me in welcoming Kingsley Joseph tonight, one of our own, as he shares some insight and perspective with us this evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Jenkins, for that kind introduction. First and foremost, I'd like to thank you all for joining me this evening in continuation of our Language of Diversity series. Not readily accessible. What is not readily accessible? Well, if you're an individual with a disability, the barrier to accessing durable medical equipment, ADA-compliant accessible housing, employment, education, and healthcare is still disproportionately inaccessible in spite of the vast, large legislations that has made the promise to address some of these issues decades ago. If you identify as being a non-Hispanic Black individual and have been newly diagnosed with cardiovascular disease, diabetes, and specifically cancer, you have a higher mortality rate than other demographics. And so, not readily accessible is a candid discussion, and where I would like to share some of my own personal experiences with some of these barriers, as well as discuss some of the healthcare disparities that exists, in which we can pretty much give a little bit more attention to, and just have an open, honest discussion. As we are practicing social distancing and meeting virtually, for those of you who have not met me in person, I do currently use a manual wheelchair for daily living. To provide some insight into why I am in need of using a wheelchair, I'll share a little bit of my personal journey. A while back, I fell victim to a horrendous shooting in which I suffered a T9 level spinal cord injury that resulted in me having paraplegia. The trajectory of the bullet not only caused the spinal cord injury, but also resulted in me suffering from a pneumothorax of my left lung, and still to this date, the bullet is lodged in my chest. At the time, future for a vibrant athlete was unknown. I would now be faced with an indeterminate future. After spending close to a week in the intensive care unit and learning a little bit more about my prognosis, I knew that I would be faced with one of the biggest challenges in my life. After being fitted with a TSO, which is to help stabilize my spine, and relearning how to just sit up in bed, I would therefore after be transferred to another medical center, in which I would spend the next 3 months in the spinal cord unit rehabbing. Upon discharge, Due to not being able to return back to my parents' home, because both my parents, myself, and my sister resided in a one-bedroom apartment on the second floor back home in Queens that was not wheelchair accessible, the only option was to enter into an assisted long-term care facility. I was then therefore transferred to Kohler Memorial Specialty Hospital, which is located on Roosevelt Island in New York City, where I would spend, believe it or not, the next 5.5 years of my life. The 5.5 years at the facility would indeed expose me to the challenges encountered daily in an overlooked demographic regarding individuals with disabilities, as myself now being included. At first, I assumed that I would receive the same level and quality of care and attention that I received during rehab, thinking that at a minimum, I would be availed to modernize therapy, exercise equipment, as well as durable medical equipment, such as the need for a walker or a wheelchair, or etc. Yet, I soon discovered that these very things were mere luxuries. I did not at the time understand how insurance companies worked and how they would decline to pay for the most basic necessities, such as for a wheelchair for a person who just suffered a traumatic injury. And so here I am, not only having to figure out what's next, but now being forced to use a loaner chair, in which in all actuality was a bulky transport chair. I know we see a lot of these wheelchairs in the hospital. Those are typically the type of chairs that are used for patient transportation, but not for daily use. It took me several years before I would be able to receive a proper lightweight chair that was more appropriate for daily use. I can even recall at my time while I was at the nurse facility of having to spend days having to lay in bed due to the mere fact that the wheelchair, the bulky big wheelchair that I was using, was either inoperable or needed to be repaired or patched up, just so I can get around and continue with my education while I was residing in the nurse facility. I did at that time decide to continue my education, and therefore my life depended upon a simple piece of durable equipment that was not readily accessible to all due to the high cost of a wheelchair. And I was not the only one who experienced this lapse in accessing vital equipment. There were several other young adults that I can recall who also succumbed to victims of horrendous types of crimes, as well as people who were elderly, individuals who were recovering from traumatic brain injuries or strokes who were also in need of these resources. So what comes to mind is, how would you feel if you were, per se, an individual who is quadriplegic, who is totally and completely dependent upon someone to help you make your day and your life, with an ambitious goal to return back into community and, let's say, pursue an education, or just would like to grab a meal with friends, or be able to just have the independence of being able to be on your own out and about in the community? Well, for that to become a reality, an individual would have to spend upwards to $10,000 to $35,000 in order for a wheelchair to become specially retrofitted in order for them to be able to get around. And typically, some of these items are not covered by insurance. So, if not for the kindness of certain charitable organizations, to name one, Wheelchair Charities, Inc., that made it possible to supplement these needs to individuals living in long-term care facilities in New York. Several individuals, the brightest of individuals actually, would be denied the ability to merely live and have hope of pursuing a future that was promised by the enactment of the Americans with Disabilities Act. So, let me go here. And just to have a slide here. Can everyone see my screen? Okay, great. So prior to the Americans with Disabilities Act, there was a law called Section 504, in which states that no otherwise qualified individual with a disability in the United States shall solely by reason of her or his disability be excluded from the participation in, be denied the benefits of, or be subjected to discrimination under any program or activity receiving federal financial assistance. After twice being vetoed, there was a bill that was presented after this act because individuals with disabilities still were unable to get access to things such as transportation, healthcare, or just the ability to get durable medical equipment. And so there was a law that was actually being proposed to Congress at the time, which was vetoed twice. It was called the Rehabilitation Act, but it was therefore in the future signed by President Nixon about 4 years later, and during the 1970s. The law was never implemented, which pretty much cost several individuals the ability to be able to be a part of society. Individuals who wanted to return to school, individuals who sought to make a life of themselves more than just being seen as their disability. And so in 1977, after years of letter writing, lobbying, and pleading with lawmakers, disability activists who became tired of waiting started a coalition. And in this coalition, they wrote to Joseph Califano, who at the time was the Secretary of Health and Education and Welfare under President Jimmy Carter, that if they did not take action into implementing this law properly, that there would be a national protest. And they actually threatened that the national protest would take action by April 4th. And so these images are showing individuals who started to begin protesting due to the law not being enacted. One of the longest sit-in protests in United States American history lasted for over a month with these individuals. So the Americans with Disabilities Act. So this is pretty much birthed from Section 504 and the Rehabilitation Act, in which during the 30th anniversary of the enactment of the ADA, which was signed into law by President George W. Actually banned discrimination against individuals who sought the need to require reasonable accommodations in areas of school, transportation, and public life. The New York Times wrote, the act does more than enlarge the independence of disabled Americans. It enlarges civil rights and humanity for all Americans. The Times also called the ADA the most sweeping and anti-discrimination measure since the Civil Rights Act of 1964. The law makes explicit the rights not just of those who are born with a disability, but of those who experience temporary disability or who are recovering from alcohol abuse or illness. The accommodations it secured became useful to everyone, not just those with disabilities. For example, anyone who pushes a stroller or pulls a suitcase has the benefit from the ramps required by the ADA for wheelchair users. Anyone who has watched a video of a noisy subway car from New York City has benefited from closed captioning intended for those who cannot hear. And anyone who has a complicated pregnancy would have been covered under the ADA. And so the ADA also helped solidify the creation of an umbrella identity for an increasingly empowered group who proudly claim themselves to become, who proudly claim themselves as being disabled. But surprisingly enough, even after 30 years of progress that has been made for individuals with disabilities attributed to, by this law, things are still not readily accessible. When I was finishing up my education and was ready to re-enter into the community and workforce and leave the nursing facility, I could not find accessible housing. The choices were rather slim, and if not for the assistance of some, would be impossible due to the cost of having to live in more modernized, newer apartment buildings that upheld accommodations for individuals in wheelchairs. There's several buildings that were pre-war or post-war that today you could see that they have not made any retrofitting or have done any sort of measures to make things a little bit more accessible. Even heading out to the club with my friends was sometimes a mission impossible task at the times, but I've always been able to find ways to make it work. And it's tough to believe that because we're, in 2020, and you would think that 30 years post a law, things would be structured a little bit more. But there's still areas that are not necessarily accessible to all. Progress still is being made, but not quick enough, but still being made at that. Disability, when you think of the term disability, it's something that affects about everyone at some point in their lives. If you weren't born with a disability, you may become temporarily disabled through an injury or an illness. Many people also age into disability or see their loved one, friend, or co-worker live with it. And so individuals who work in healthcare, as is ourselves, who are joining online, as a people, we can be a little bit mindful of how spaces are designed for individuals with disabilities, as well as be conscious of some of the health equities and disparities that this particular demographic faces. Health disparities. This is something that I actually wanted to discuss as well, because it's not only individuals who have disabilities who are having a lack of accessibility to things that are needing regards towards their health or durable medical equipment. but healthcare disparities exist at a very high alarming rate for individuals of color in this country. And so for our diversity series, I also want to include some things about health disparities. Another demographic that faces several challenges regarding health equities and vast disparities, especially in cancer outcomes for a large majority of Blacks in this country. Blacks are the second largest racial ethnic group in the US and are estimated to make up about 15% of the population in 2060. Blacks are mostly concentrated in the South of the United States. And according to the American Cancer Society, Blacks have the highest death rate and shortest survival rate of any racial or ethnic group in the United States for most cancers. Black men specifically have the highest cancer incidence rate. These disparities are reflections of social, economic, cultural differences, and access to quality healthcare ever so more than just simply biological differences. Black men and women also bear disproportionately high burdens of other disease in which also influence cancer survival and outcomes. Consequently, life expectancy is lower for Blacks than whites among men, 71.5 versus 76% of average life, and women, 77.9 versus 81 for life expectancy. And so if you can see here in both of these figures that the leading cause of death for Blacks in cancer is at a higher incident rate than non-Blacks, as well as for other diseases. I came across this interesting article when I was reading Elle magazine of a young woman who was named Jessica Florence. At the time, she was an architecture student from Jacksonville, Florida, who noticed an abnormal lump in her breast at the age of 21. She visited two doctors who both told her that it was simply fibroids and that she was simply too young to have breast cancer. It was not until she received new insurance that she was able to see another physician who ordered a biopsy and breast ultrasound. The results came back as her being diagnosed with stage 3A breast cancer, which is a more severe cancer which includes lymph node involvement. Statistically speaking, Black women are more likely to be diagnosed at a younger age and later stages of their disease, as well as 40% are more likely to die from breast cancer itself. After over a year of misdiagnosis and then ultimately fighting the disease, 6 rounds of chemotherapy, radiation, and having a unilateral mastectomy, which you can see in the background of this image, she was all clear with treatments. This is in 2017. She was deemed clear from having to proceed any further medical intervention. But 2 years later, she suddenly became plagued by several headaches, sending her cancer intuition into overdrive. She then went ahead and made multiple visits to different physicians in which no one was taking her serious again. Later on, in April, Florence learned that the cancer originally in her breast had metastasized. In 2020, almost every system and institution is currently taking a look at internal racism the few are more urgently requiring that reflection from the medical community. And so there are things that are being done in regards towards trying to bridge the gap with healthcare disparities, especially with regarding cancer. For example, the Baser Center for BRCA and Anderson Cancer Center of University of Pennsylvania recently launched a new initiative to improve awareness and participation of Black patients in breast cancer studies. And so these disparities in cancer outcomes and cancer care has historically been attributed to access. And so just not in comparison to my circumstances, there, in terms of experiencing inaccessibility, not necessarily only attributed as a socioeconomic problem, but a cultural divide, is a bridge of what I wanted to pretty much bridge together the similarities between the two. There's only so much that legislation can ever do. The issue goes beyond civil rights. It's also about hospitality, patronage, and a broader vision of accessibility, and ultimately about doing what's best for the bottom line, which is ourselves. This is an image of Botanical Gap Gardens in Brooklyn, New York, in which an area that was recently made wheelchair accessible, when patrons who were in wheelchairs started advocating that they would not be able to enjoy the beauty of a simple garden. And this is something that was created and done fairly recently, which shows you that things, when people are, when companies or organizations or construction companies are designing things, they neglect to be inclusive in thinking about disabilities and thinking about others. And so, just wanted to conclude that I believe we all can learn a lesson from not only my personal journey and my fight with getting through the difficult things that I've experienced in regards towards not necessarily having access to something as simple as a wheelchair, but I think that what we all can get from this is that we can look, we can pay a little bit more attention to these areas and help not widen the gap, but bridge the gap between disparities with individuals with physical disabilities, as well as people of color who in this country experience that medical disparities in terms of healthcare outcomes. Here in this image is just an Wheelchair Charities Inc., which is an organization that I'm a part of that helps to donate motorized wheelchairs and manual wheelchairs. I just wanted to put that up there just for people to see that there are organizations that are helping individuals with disabilities and who are trying to promote disability activism. You can go to their website just to see how you can maybe do something similar in your community, because if organizations like this didn't exist, I wouldn't know how far I would have been able to pursue my education and or well-being to get to the point of where I am currently. And so take-home message is we all can do something to help bridge the healthcare disparities as in healthcare for cancer patients and in disability activism. We can all be our own activists if we all pay a little bit more attention to the needs between each other. Thank you.
Thank you, Kingsley. Very powerful words. You're very inspiring your life, and really make me proud to be a part of the College of Medicine. We will open things up to the chat box if people have questions. But I did have a question from when you talked about your earlier experiences and even having to be in the nursing facility for 5 years. How did you encourage yourself? And how did you stay focused because you were still in school and then were able to obtain, multiple degrees after this trauma? But how did you keep going in the midst of all of that?
That's a really great question. The fighter in me could never so I've always grew up playing sports, and I've always have been competitive in regards towards sports. And part of that has intertwined into my character in regards towards not necessarily accepting defeat. What I mean by defeat, I meaning not necessarily not accepting things that are maybe that don't work out for you, but just not accepting self-defeat, meaning me quitting prior to me being able to see the fruition of what I'm currently pursuing. A lot of that is part of my faith. A lot of that is motivation that comes from my parents, hardworking individuals who laid the foundation of me having the work ethic that I have. A lot of that comes from just inspiration that I saw while I was at the nursing facility, seeing that in spite of all the different various injuries and sicknesses and things, just seeing all this at a young age is sort of overwhelming because it's a hidden population. It's when you're young, you're running around, just you're living life, and you're so focused on yourself. And at one point in time, I had to step back and and take in what's really going on with my life, and to take in what's actually being done with these individuals at this facility, seeing how some people were neglected, seeing how simple it is, how difficult it is to not get access to something simple as a wheelchair, just to be able to get around. And so those things lit like a fire in me to say that if I do make out of this facility, become successful in life, that I would try to make this a part of who I am as an individual, to advocate for those who are unable to, whichever way it may be, whether it's sharing my story or whether it's donating time at different facilities or speaking about my experience. All of that is part of what helped me continue my education, and which gave me inspiration and motivation enough to not wallow in self-pity, but overcome those trying times that I was in.
A lot of everyone here on the line is dealing with some form of kind of isolation with these times and kind of social distancing or not being able to see your family. You were very young when this happened, and I guess I'm curious in how you were able to adapt to this new environment. And then also, I am also curious, at what point did you recognize that you needed more than what was initially given to you in terms of the equipment or the wheelchair that was just not really adequate? But first, how did you kind of deal with adapting to this new environment for so many years? And when did the kind of the light bulb come on that there was more that you needed to be successful?
Yeah, I've always been an individual who's easily adaptable to situations. I don't know, I think that comes from my parents. Just seeing how they have had to always adapt with making do with providing for us. So I've always learned to adapt to, you know, whether it's a good situation or a bad situation. And while living at the facility, just seeing that there was like so much lack, I was really surprised because I always was under the assumption that healthcare facilities are top tier in this country, whether it's a nursing facility or you know, a standalone clinic or a community clinic. I always was under that assumption that people may not necessarily have the best of equipment, but they'll get an opportunity to have the equipment, such as durable medical equipment. I was really shocked when learning that the price of a motorized wheelchair at that, or a regular manual wheelchair, but I was shocked that insurance companies would outright deny individuals, irregardless of what is being presented medically necessary on, you know, medical documentation. That really, like, I guess, stood out to me as, how is this even appropriate? How does this happen? How did we get to a point where, you know, and a company could say that something as simple as a mobility aid is not necessary? And so those things made me really think and question, you know, the system that we, you know, deal with in regards to healthcare disparities. And it just motivated me to just say, you know what, I'm experiencing it on this end, and maybe I can do something to change that experience on the other end through my education and through different types of charitable works or whatever it may be. And so I would say those are the things that kept me motivated and helped me to continue to pursue my education. Plus, I've always wanted to learn a little bit more how um, I could potentially be of use in the future, because I always knew that that situation that I was in would be temporary, even though I didn't know when I would be able to get out of those trying times and difficulties. I always knew that at some point I would make it through if I just stayed persistent and just kept headstrong. And so, yeah.
That's excellent. I have a question on this from one of the attendees, and you know, it kind of reminds me of the word disability and how that can sometimes be a trigger depending on how people look at it. Because I know that you define yourself by your abilities, not just disabilities. But the question is, how were you able to see yourself as more than your disability? What did you do to change your perspective, or how did that change over time?
Hmm. I never saw myself as an impairment or a disability. It's hard. Even some days, you know, like I step around and I do physical therapy at home. I stretch a little bit. I get up, and it's like, am I really in a wheelchair? Like sometimes I forget because I'm so involved with the business of living. I'm so involved with the business of working and being productive. And so I think part of that was like my mindset was that I'm still capable of having a full life and capable of just doing anything. Obviously, with the assistance of the mobility aid, but I never saw or thought of myself mentally as disabled, because I always believed that if I labeled myself internally as being that, then I would pretty much stay at that level. I'm not saying that that is a level, but I'm saying internally I would use that as an excuse for why I could not do something, or why I could not pursue something. And so, like, interestingly enough, like when I was pursuing what I'm currently doing in medical physics, I remember I had like an advisor after 1 or 2 semesters of going to classes and doing pretty okay, I remember he told me, "I don't think this is right for you." And I was like, "Well, what do you mean you don't think this is right for me?" He said, "Well, the profession involves lots of heavy lifting and it's physically demanding." And I was just very puzzled about what he was saying. I was like, "Well, I can still lift things. I do go to the gym. I still have my faculties. I still have my hands. Like, what is it that you're getting to?" And that's what caused me to leave. But it's as though if I painted myself internally with that same mentality or approach with that same mentality or the way that he approached me, then maybe I would not have continued pursuing what I'm currently doing, or maybe that kind of mindset would hinder me from doing other things. And so I guess part of it is motivation, part of it is self-determination to not allow someone else to paint me as what I can't do. Even though I know certain things I am limited to doing, but I just never let that seep in, I guess.
I've known your positive personality since the first time we met. Now, did you get that from your parents as well? Which parent was the one that said, because I heard you say, don't use this as an excuse. So was it the mom or dad or who?
I guess it's my dad. He was a little bit
Okay.
more of the calmer parent. My mom
Yeah.
was the disciplinary person. So
Okay.
I get that a little bit. Oh, yeah, I guess I get that from my dad.
Okay. Well, that's
Mhm.
excellent. There's in your talk, you talked about people having a broader vision of accessibility, and even with the botanical gardens, things that people take for granted all the time. There's so many things that people take for granted, and I know you know that. We all know that. What are ways that students or faculty or community members can keep that in mind? Like, what are some of the things you think that people could do, even on a simple level, to keep that vision of accessibility at the forefront, or simple things that they can do to advocate?
I guess, I mean, it all starts within your community. So I guess when you're out taking a walk or going to the mall, just pay a little bit more attention to, is this accessible or not? Because believe it or not, there's still sidewalks that are being reconstructed, especially in Toledo. When I moved out here, um, I noticed that several sidewalks did not have like I guess like you would say, like a ramp. And so I could not get off that sidewalk. I would have to actually backtrack, get off of the curb somewhere else just to be able to get to where I was going. And so I guess students, faculty, people can pay attention to the things in their communities that are not necessarily ADA compliant or accessible. Um, and by noticing those things, maybe advocate to the city, or if it's a building that you're going to get services, or a restaurant that you're visiting, maybe just taking note of that and helping make those small little minor changes and recommendations.
Absolutely. What do you think would be really helpful for students who haven't even started their clinical rotations yet, to kind of keep in mind when they are serving, underserved populations, marginalized communities, and really working with those facing disabilities?
I think prior to training, I think a lot of us could maybe spend a little bit more time volunteering in areas and communities that are mostly affected. Visiting nursing homes is something that I did in high school. I remember like one of our teachers taking us to a nursing home to sing Christmas carols and to cheer up the residents that were there. let it be known that, I would become a resident in the future of a nurse facility. So I guess students can volunteer a little bit more of their time with that type of community, with that specific demographic, just to come to a better understanding of the challenges that they actually face. Because I think sometimes, when I go to a doctor's appointment, the physician may ask me straightforward questions. How do you feel? How you, fever? All, the basic simple questions that we would ask, but not necessarily dig deep into the other side. The things that are not necessarily easily readable, such as, where's this person coming from? Meaning, like, what's their socioeconomic background or their educational background? Like I was speaking, this her named Florence. She was not necessarily a person who was educated or well versed in her symptoms, but it was in pursuit of trying to figure out what was going on with her body that she was able to find, like an answer. So this is to show that not everyone has the same educational understanding, socioeconomic, or access to the most basic things. And so as a student, you just have to, I guess, have an open mind in the demographics that you potentially will treat or that you're dealing with. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there's something you said, and just like, how would you feel? How would you feel? You want to go to the Botanical Garden, something very simple to enjoy. How would you feel if there was a barrier, a physical barrier to enjoying that? Something very simple, not always the most lofty thing, but something that people take for granted every day. You had an advisor. Was this an advisor that talked to you about your goals, or this is someone you knew? Or
because, yeah, this was.
I think we've all had like somebody along the way, a naysayer, say this is it's not a reasonable goal. How did you really handle that? And also, did you have someone who was positive, someone telling you outside of your parents, even who, maybe faced any similar challenge, who said, look, this does not define you?
To be honest, I felt insulted.
Well, yeah.
I was really upset. I was like, I spent how much money? And I'm not gonna. I name dropped the university before, but I'm not gonna do that here because I don't want anybody, outraged and writing letters. But
yeah.
No, like I was insulted. I just never been. I've never taken liking to. I've always loved criticism, whether I felt it was good or bad. But that criticism wasn't necessarily constructive criticism. I think it was just someone in their sentiments of trying to reflect what maybe they feel that's not possible, and not necessarily looking at the individual. And so I just ignored him. I mean, I just pretty much ignored him. Like, I mean, to have survived the shooting, which, missed my aorta by so much inches, to have been living in a facility and just dealing with all of this, in my youth, it's like, well, can I really pay mind to one individual's opinion? I have a long life to live. I have a mission. I have goals. The things that I saw at the facility and things that I believe can be improved for people with disabilities supersedes one individual's opinion. And so I just brushed it off. Obviously, I left.
Yep.
But yeah.
Did you have someone else who was like a real big motivator? Because you did choose a difficult academic journey. I mean, just no doubt about it. I mean, when I hear physics, I feel like I'm it's kryptonite and Superman. Like, I don't know. So, you pick that, I mean, you picked kind of a more challenging journey. And, I didn't even share, your master's degrees and different things that you've done. So, but like, did you have someone else who was like a mentor or someone who had a real pivotal role for you?
No, actually, surprisingly, I never really shared that with anyone, even like parents and stuff. Like when I think people were more concerned with my health, with um, more concerned with my health than all the other activities I were doing. So I guess maybe it slipped under the rug that I was actually, like doing like two programs at once.
Yeah.
That's another story in itself. But no, I kept it to myself. I didn't really share it with people. But there are tons of people that actually were great at in terms of like just not looking at me as a disabled person, just looking at me as a mind, as a person who can contribute to the field. I met tons of people like that, especially obviously here where I am.
Yeah.
So it's I guess a lot of motivational factors that help continue progress and continue to, I guess, push me to excel. So yeah, I didn't really have anyone specifically that pulled me to the side and said, "Hey, I know that this is a disappointment to you, and you can continue to pursue." I just took it upon myself to keep going.
Everybody's kind of stressed out. You're not immune to hearing the complaints here and there. Like, how do you deal with stress? I mean, we all have more than one thing going on. You may have work stress, home stress, and then everything else. And it sounds to me that obviously, thrived academically, professionally. But how do you deal with stress? What do you do to cope with stress, and even in the midst of these uncertain times?
I always ask myself, like, really, what more can I actually do about the situation today? Like, I can worry myself to death about a circumstance or a situation, something that's troubling me. But then really I always try to refocus myself and say, okay, if it's a situation that I'm capable of fixing, fine, great. But I guess a lot of patience. Being in that facility taught me a lot of patience. Taught me how to actually wait on things that I, obviously would want to do immediately, but having those barriers in place just taught me to be patient. Taught me to not be antsy or anxious, just to be calm. And I guess part of my nature as well, part of my personality is just try not to spaz out, as they would say, when things go awry. So.
Well, I really want to thank you. I've learned a lot tonight. I really want to thank you for your words and insights. I promise you this will not be the last time that I ask you to speak. And I really thank you for your advocacy and thank everyone on the line for joining us tonight. You really kind of used your life, and I know there are many visions that you have, even beyond this training that you're going on through now, to advocate and serve the underserved. So thank you again, Kingsley, and thank you everyone for joining us. Good night.
Everyone. Good night.
Thank you.